Hey, it's Seraphin, and today we're making burger buns. These buns are fluffy, soft, delicious, and have a long shelf life thanks to the use of Tangzhong and Poolish. As I've explained in previous videos, this combination gives you both the best in flavor and texture. This recipe also calls for eggs. Including whole eggs increases the dough strength and bread volume, and their interaction with salt makes eggs more functional in these aspects. Now, what eggs do to the dough and bread is actually a rather complex subject, so I'm going to leave the details for another video. You just need to know that these burger buns are awesome. So let's jump right in. This is a very quick recipe, taking around 3 hours to make, with the exception of the time it takes to make the Tangzhong and Poolish. Tangzhong is what we make first this time. In a glass mixing bowl, we want to pour in 50 grams of boiling water. Being certain that it's as hot as can be, then we immediately want to bring in the flour, rapidly mixing the two together with a wooden rolling pin and cleaning up with a spatula. As long as we work quickly, we should be able to hydrate a large amount of the flour while the water temperature remains above 65 degrees Celsius, the minimum temperature needed for starch gelatinization. This may take a little more effort than in our other recipes, since we could only allocate enough water for a 1-to-1 flour to water ratio. You should know, though, that this ratio is still sufficient for starch gelatinization, being beyond the excess amount of water needed. So there's not much difference from using a 1-to-2 flour to water ratio in terms of results. We'll still be getting the damaged and gelatinized starch that will make our bread softer and extend its shelf life, as well as sweeten the bread. Once the roux is evenly mixed, we're done. We just need to let the Tangzhong rest overnight in the fridge so that we can fully reap the benefits in our final dough. Next up on our to-do list, we're going to prepare the Poolish. Just 3 ingredients: 50 grams of water, liquids first to prevent lumps, then 1/8 teaspoon of yeast, and finally 50 grams of flour. We mix this until it's homogeneous using chopsticks, our favorite tool for this task. Just whirling it around until everything is well combined. With such a small amount of Poolish, this shouldn't take much effort at all. And at the end, we'll have a rough and lumpy mixture in the bowl. Just what we want. We'll then clean up the sides with a spatula, going round in a nice circle. And then we're done. We'll cover the bowl and let the Poolish ferment for about 2 hours at 29 degrees Celsius. For ease of storage and to make any rises more visible, we can also transfer the Poolish into a glass like this. The fermentation timing is based on both our room temperature and the characteristics of the Poolish. Our Poolish pre-ferment does run on the more liquid side. The hydration is 100% after all, and this speeds up fermentation time compared to pre-ferments with a lower hydration, since the extra water allows the yeast and endogenous enzymes in the flour to move around more easily, resulting in faster breakdown and fermentation. Very beneficial to us in building flavor quickly. Now, when it's risen up to this level, we want to make sure it's well covered and sealed before putting it in the fridge overnight as a way to both retard the yeast and give the enzymes more time to work. We don't want the Poolish to dry out, so do be careful with the cover. You should know that with the Poolish in this condition, we're more focused on the flavor it can bring rather than its gassing power. That's why we add more instant yeast later, so we don't need to focus too much on the yeast activity in the Poolish. And after that night, here's how the Tangzhong and Poolish should look. Perfect. With that, let's make our final dough. Mise en place is where we begin, assembling all our ingredients first, and since we're using a stand mixer, we have our stand mixer's bowl in front of us too. We add the Tangzhong to the bowl first, using a spatula to scoop it up and scraping any bits in. Then we tip in the Poolish. The Poolish shouldn't be too runny, especially because it's cold. It should come down in a rather elastic stretch, thanks to its gluten network. We use a spatula, as before, to scrape in any pieces left in the glass, cleaning it up as best as we can. From here, we add the liquids of the final dough first, so 45 grams of milk, just letting it pour in, then 45 grams of whole egg, so we cracked an egg, stirred it, and then measured out 45 grams, saving the rest for later. And after those liquids, we toss in 20 grams of sugar, 4 grams of salt, 1/4 of a teaspoon of yeast, and 150 grams of bread flour. We also have 10 grams of butter on the side and already softened to be mixed in after the dough has some gluten development. So with all the ingredients in, we want to give this a good mix with our spatula first. This should take less than a minute. We just want most of the flour to hydrate. So we don't need to keep mixing it until it's smooth because that's the stand mixer's job. So in the stand mixer with a dough hook attachment, we put the bowl in and turn the speed up to medium-high. We want to let this run for 3 to 4 minutes. As the mixer runs, the dough will go from shaggy to very cohesive. Keep in mind though that this is only the first stage of mixing. We only want to achieve some initial gluten development, not fully knead the dough. So when it looks like this, smooth and in a tight ball around the dough hook, then we're good. All right, we stop the mixer and now we add in our butter with our spatula, slathering it in. Then we're going to start the stand mixer again, letting it run on low first to spread out the butter, giving it a 20 to 30 seconds before bringing it back up to medium-high. We want to let it run for 4 to 5 minutes this time. It's an expected fact that the butter will cause the dough to look as if it's falling apart. The addition of fat will do this as it coats the gluten and everything else, preventing the dough from coming back together. But in a few minutes, the dough will incorporate the fat, becoming one whole piece again. A little more of mixing and the dough becomes smooth and much less sticky, visible by the cleaner bottom of the bowl. At this point, the dough is definitely done, so we stop the mixer, detach the hook, and take out the bowl, bringing it to our work surface. Before we handle the dough, we want to line a bowl and our hands with some vegetable oil. Doesn't have to be very much, just enough to fully cover our hands and the bowl. When that's done, we'll first do a quick window pane test on the dough, taking a small portion and spreading it out thin enough to see light through it. So this one looks so good. It's a wonderful sign of full gluten development, which is pretty important to us since this recipe is very quick overall. We don't have the long periods of time needed for gluten development during fermentation, so we need it done when we mix the dough. Knowing that the stand mixer has done its job perfectly, we now want to get the dough off the dough hook, pulling it off and using our scraper if needed. Once it's off, we pull out the entire dough with our scraper. We want to shape it into a bowl with our hands. It shouldn't be sticky at all if you have enough oil, which is why it was so important to coat them well earlier. Next, we put the bowl into our lined bowl and we cover the entire thing. We're going to leave it to bulk ferment for an hour at 29 degrees Celsius or until it at least doubles in size. And here's the dough after an hour. We'll uncover it, it's puffed up and the surface has further smoothed out. The yeast are active and the gluten has relaxed. We'll prepare the work surface and our hands by dusting with a little flour. We'll sprinkle the top of the dough with a little flour too. Only a little is needed. This isn't a sticky dough. Then we'll punch down the dough. It's well fermented, so there's little resistance. It should deflate easily. We gather up the dough. I don't even need a scraper for this part because it's so easy to handle. Just scoop it out and onto the work surface. Then clean up with the scraper to pick up any loose bits. We lightly shape the dough into a log, folding it over itself. And now it's time to divide and shape the dough. We're dividing first before using a scale to divide the dough into 6 equal parts. Taking the easiest step first, we divide the dough into 2. Following that by splitting the pieces into 3. On the scale, we're aiming for each piece to weigh around 79 to 80 grams. There's only 6 pieces of dough, so getting them all to about an equal weight should be done in a few moments. It's absolutely nothing like our previous video with 21 pieces, so this is a breeze. When they're all of equal weight, we are immediately shaping them, so taking a piece, using a little flour here and there if needed to prevent the dough from sticking. We want to first flatten it out with our fingers and continue by tucking the edges into the center, like so. You want to press down firmly here. This will help degas any large bubbles, giving us that nice crumb. We can also flatten it further with our palms to fully deflate it, pushing out any bubbles. Once it's a tight ball like this, we'll smooth out its edges by rounding it in our hands, just rolling it in our palms. And that's done. We immediately put it on our baking tray that's been lined with a silicone baking mat. You could also use parchment paper. We'll now repeat for the rest of the dough, repeating the same steps. This is a really simple shaping method, which is also a part of why we didn't use a bench rest in this recipe. There's not much stretching required in the shaping, unlike, say, a pizza, baguette, or a roll. We're simply making a small dough ball. The only thing we need to be cautious of are any large gas bubbles in the dough. If you press down and degas the dough properly, you should be able to get rid of all of them, preventing the bread from having large holes in the crumb. Other than that, the rest is a piece of cake. Again, we also sprinkle a bit of flour as needed to prevent the dough from sticking to our hands or the surface. Alright, with all the pieces shaped and on the baking tray, we're going to cover them all, prevent them from drying out, and leave them to proof for around 17 minutes. Because we're baking them at 180 degrees Celsius later, we also set aside enough time before they're done to preheat the oven to that temperature. The proofing time is incredibly important because it's when the dough's final gas cell structure is formed. So we need to make sure to give the dough balls all the time they need so we don't get a bunch of underproofed, dense burger buns, while also keeping them from overproofing, in which case they'll end up swelling up and collapsing, resulting, again, in dense burger buns. So as soon as the dough looks like this, which is almost 2 times as large as their original volume, we're going to uncover them and continue to the next step. Taking the leftover egg from the final dough, we'll add about a teaspoon of milk to it to make an egg wash. Using a silicone brush, we're going to mix well, and then we want to coat each of the dough buns with this wash. When we bake it, the amino acids and reducing sugars from the egg and milk will participate in the Maillard reaction, resulting in plenty of flavor and a beautiful appearance, 2 things every bread baker loves. We'll make sure that we brush down every part of the dough with the egg wash. And then to finish off their look, we'll sprinkle them with sesame seeds. Sesame seeds are optional, really, but they add so much to the flavor and the buns look amazing with them, so I never skip adding them. I try to sprinkle them as evenly as I can. I do like the randomly spread appearance though, it makes a bun look so lively. And with that done, the buns are off to the oven. We'll bake them for 12 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius, top and bottom heat, middle rack, and then lower the heat to 150 degrees Celsius and bake for another 8 minutes. When the dough first enters a hot oven, it will start to rapidly heat up. It doesn't do so evenly though, with the center of the dough taking much longer to heat up, partially due to heat transfer and the cooling effect of the water's evaporation. Regardless, as it warms up, the yeast goes into a frenzy and enzymes work faster to break down the proteins and starches. This results in a final burst of carbon dioxide from the yeast, and as temperatures rise, liquids vaporize, resulting in more gas, and gases expand as they get hotter. Along with other factors, this leads to that spectacular oven spring that gives us fluffy and airy buns. Temperatures continue to rise and the oven spring ceases, with the bread settling into its final volume. The yeast dies off at around 60 degrees Celsius and eventually enzymes are deactivated. The gluten can only take us so far, and as it denatures, the starch steps in to take its place in giving the bread the structure it needs to stay firm. On the crust of the bread, where temperatures are the hottest, the aforementioned Maillard reaction occurs, aided along by our egg wash. We also have caramelization of the sugars, which contributes to the browning of these buns. The inside of the bread will never go beyond 100 degrees Celsius since it still contains water, and in fact for this bread we aren't expecting the internal temperature to go beyond 90 degrees Celsius. And after 20 minutes of baking, they're done. Right out of the oven, you can see the benefits of our wash on their appearance. They look insanely appetizing already, and we're going to make that even better by brushing them with butter while they're still warm. This will give them that glossy sheen, making them look even better. These buns taste delicious and make for a great burger. They add their own complex flavors, complementing whatever filling you give them. They're also pretty long-lasting. They stay soft and get sweeter over time, so you can definitely make them ahead. That way you can have the burger buns ready for use at any time you'd like. Just need to cut them into two, fill them with your favorite fillings, and bite down. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and bye!